Welcome to the Coliving with PadSplit Podcast, where we talk to successful PadSplit investors and have them share their secrets to success, not only in PadSplit, but in other facets of real estate. This podcast will help you expedite your learning to be a successful investor in the co-living space. We are your hosts, Ray and Orianna Nunez. Show us some love by subscribing and sharing so we can continue to bring on amazing guests.
Hello, and welcome to the Coliving with PadSplit Podcast. I'm your host, Ray Nunez. And
This is Orianna Nunez.
I love when she just says it. So our guest today is Carlos Morell. He's a good buddy of ours too. It's funny, we have a lot of buddy of ours, but we really do. We're neighbors. We meet up, we talk investment strategies, and we have him here talking about not only how he got into PadSplit, but how he was able to grow, his thought process and acquisitions, also running things by family and friends to kind of vet and level set with jumping into any type of projects. So we're going to go through his story and how he's been able to navigate through co-living and discuss also the benefits of co-living to society and not just our bottom dollar. So we're happy to have Carlos here to explain his story.
Yeah, so many good nuggets on this one. You don't want to miss it, guys. Let's roll.
All right, let's do it.
Let's roll. Carlos, you're here.
Yes, I'm here. The 5-minute drive from my house to your all's house.
We're neighbors.
That's right.
We knew we lived close. We didn't know how close.
Yeah.
We're excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a while.
It has been a while.
It has, yep.
Where
Life gets
were we?
busy.
Yeah. Life is lifing.
I remember, now I was like, where were we last? The local bar. I think it was.
Was it?
And
At
we
the
were
brewery?
talking.
That's right.
And we were
That's right.
talking PadSplit.
Gatlin.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, what's been happening? I mean, should we start with what's been happening, or should we start with how did you get started? Because you were in banking.
I was in banking. I was in banking for 23 years here in Orlando in just different capacities as a commercial lender last. And really, real estate, I had clients from years that kept telling me, you got to get into real estate. You got to get into real estate. And being a banker, having a underwriter mentality, it was always difficult to make that leap because what if this, what if that?
All the risk.
All the risk. I mean, honestly, all the risk. So it really starts to kind of, the reward, you see it, and then the more you, what if, it starts to erode. Okay, I can't do that. I'm married. I got a mortgage. I got kids. I got, bills to pay, et cetera. Stick with the W-2. But actually, a good friend of mine that's in commercial real estate a couple of years ago stumbled across co-living and in particular PadSplit and said, will you check this out? And I did. And quite honestly, I totally dismissed it. I thought, what a bunch of BS.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you going to get 2 to 3 times, what you would get as a single family home rental? And I just really dismissed it totally.
That's crazy.
Did your friend continue on, or did you both just say screw it?
He was going with the story.
He stuck with it for a bit, but he actually, around that same time, he was working for a commercial real estate firm, and he decided to go out on his own. So he had to kind of refocus on, hey, I'm going to go out on my own for the first time. So all his energy was put into that. So he pretty much shelved PadSplit. And so did I almost immediately. I looked into it, checked out the website, looked at the little, Q&A and whatnot. And this is prior to having boots on the ground from a PadSplit representative standpoint, and just totally dismissed it. And again, still in the back of my mind, looking at properties to purchase, to rent. Wasn't super crazy about flipping. I'm more of a cash flow guy versus capital gains guy. So I was in banking, like I said, for 23 years, and right at pretty much the start of the pandemic, I had made a switch to a different bank. Wasn't a great fit. I was there for about 8 months, decided to part ways, and my wife had stayed home for the first few years with our kids and decided to get back into the workforce. So she had gotten a W-2 job, good health insurance, et cetera. So we decided, hey, this is a good time for me to kind of go out on my own and have the security of knowing, hey, we got that W-2 paycheck, and more importantly, the
insurance,
healthcare, all right, with a couple of little kids.
Right.
So. And
then you started flirting with PadSplit again.
Yeah. And then, honestly, what happened? Orianna came into my life. I got an email from PadSplit saying, hey, we've got this local representative. She's going to host this event. And I was like, okay, well, now I've got a person, right, local that I could look into her eyes and say, is this a bunch of BS or not?
Be honest.
Yeah. And obviously I reached out to you prior to the event. And when you told me that you and Ray were investors before you were employees of PadSplit, now I thought, okay, well, they're drinking the Kool-Aid, right? So these are people that we really have to listen to and understand. And, you guys were extremely candid about this is what works, this is what we're tweaking, this is what we haven't gotten our arms around yet. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And that was, it made a huge impact, right? So now I kind of revisited, more determined to seeing if I could find a piece of real estate that would fit the model well, and went to the event, and then really got a lot more focused on, okay, let me see, can I find the right property that's going to fit this and make it work, and let's do it. And that's all trying to float, now being on my own, doing business consulting, right, commercial loan brokering. But it worked out because at the end of the day, I had indirect real estate experience from the standpoint of being a banker and underwriting, commercial deals.
Right.
And really the PadSplit, in my opinion, when you're looking at a deal, should be underwritten more like multifamily, commercial real estate than it should residential.
I agree with you. A lot of people don't see it that way, but that's a great way to underwrite and analyze a property for a PadSplit.
I think it's the right way to do it, quite honestly. I think what happens is with a lot of folks that have been in residential real estate, they look at market value, they look at market rents, but that's really not the way to look at it. I really think that you have to underwrite it like a multifamily apartment complex, right? So,
we even say it, you're getting multifamily returns with a single family home asset.
Exactly. So why would you not underwrite as multifamily commercial?
And some of the loans that you might actually pull for a property like that might be commercial loans or commercial insurance. So if everything keeps heading in that direction and it keep using the term commercial, then you should probably start to evaluate that property as a commercial property.
I agree. I think any newer concept, innovation always gets a bunch of pushback, right? Well, that's not going to work. That doesn't make any sense. We're not going to do it that way. We've never done it that way. And it's going to take a while. I think at the end of the day, there's a multitude of hurdles, right, to overcome. I think from an appraiser standpoint, they've got certain rules they have to abide by. And they're like, hey, maybe it makes sense to underwrite this thing as commercial. However, based on our rules and regulations, we still have to underwrite, we still have to value it
as a single
family, right?
And you're right. Well, let's talk about PadSplit is not new. Like, people have been renting by the room for decades, like centuries.
Yeah.
A lot of Hispanics have benefit from it.
Yeah.
Immigrants in general have benefit from renting by the room, right? So we're not creating anything new. No, it is more centralized. So to your point, we're going through those hurdles of growth, of evolution, and changing a lot of the things that haven't been established before or were there, but were not big enough for us to cause a change.
Right.
And I think that's part of it. Like, we keep reading more on code, right? And our code is so old. Like, how can we improve the need for our society and housing if our code is still like written in the 20s? And that's like almost 100 years.
Yeah.
A lot of things have changed, right? So I know these are the growing pains that we have as a company, but the positive impact that we cause, and this is maybe me personally, how I feel about it, is worth every single battle.
I think so, because in all honesty, for me, when I was evaluating the concept, I thought, okay, and I shared it with friends and family like you would do. Hey, I'm thinking about this. People that you trust and, would care about your well-being, right? So what's their feedback? And almost unanimously, the feedback was...
That's crazy.
And the more feedback like that I got, the more, not defensive, but I think objective I got about it. It's like, okay, well, yeah, that doesn't work for Ray and Orianna because they're a couple. They don't want to share a house with, but we were all single people at one point in time. And we live in a world now where a lot of times, fortunately or unfortunately, we start out single, married, kids, and end up single again, right? So, and because the cost of living continues to escalate, because the cost of housing continues to escalate, this isn't a bad concept. Yeah, you got to share a bathroom, you got to share a kitchen with somebody, but if you've got a job, maybe 2 jobs, maybe a job and a hobby, maybe a job and a, significant other that has a house that you hang out there, why not? Why not save, an immense amount of money paying X dollars versus what you would be paying for a studio apartment, in Orlando. I think it's probably on average of
$1,800.
Yeah, $1,800.
A studio now.
Yeah, a studio.
Which is like mind-blowing.
Yeah. So the idea of being able to save and, you got to adapt to living with, potentially strangers, at least on the front end.
It's a temporary thing.
Exactly.
But it's going to only push you forward 2-3 years.
Yeah.
And we've seen those cases happen, right? We've seen tons of members that have chosen to live in a PadSplit. 2 years later, they saved enough to buy their own home.
Yeah, that's. I mean, in a perfect world, right? That's what we're doing is a stepping stone instead of kind of a starter house.
That's right.
It's a starter room to get you to a full-blown apartment or getting you into a house.
Right. It's like, take this time, breathe, save.
Yeah.
Get your finances straight. Get out of the rat race and moving forward.
Yeah.
So Carlos, I never knew this part of the story, but you said you ran it past your family as you'd want your family and friends to know what you're working on.
Yeah.
And it's either going to be obviously met with, hey, I think it's a great idea, or it's a terrible idea. It's never in between. How did that, not the family portion go, but then obviously you were more intrigued about the concept and you started to do your research as a skeptical first-time host that's analytical. How did you go about the process of vetting PadSplit or co-living as a concept after hearing it from us two and then putting it into some form of practice?
Well, I mean, it's been front page news now for years, right? There's no affordable housing. There's no, for me personally, I like to call it housing that's affordable because affordable housing has this almost like synonymous
negative connotation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a negative connotation. It's like synonymous with Section 8, right? You think affordable housing, it's, the projects, it's Section 8, et cetera. So I always like using, housing that's affordable. There's a desperate need for it, housing that people can afford on their own without any subsidy. And, so I've known about that. We've all known about that. We've seen it in the news. And like I said, front page news in the newspaper, whoever reads the newspaper.
Digital form.
Yeah, digital form. So number one, there's a need. Okay, how is that need being met? Well, it's not being met very well, right? Because everyone knows we need it. Politicians know we need it. But whenever they try and increase density, approve, for a 10-story apartment complex, there's always opposition. I mean, constant opposition from, the NIMBYs. And I get it. At the end of the day, I mean, who wants more traffic? Who wants more density? But we need it, and it's just the reality of it. So I thought, okay, well, there's a desperate need here, and here's a product that could meet some of that need. So that seems like a pretty, perfect fit, right? Any good inventor will tell you, find a need and fill it, and boom, you'll be successful.
Yeah,
that's right.
So I thought from that standpoint, the co-living concept on its own was like, why hasn't this really been happening, at this level? So that was kind of the checkbox number one.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously then researching PadSplit and whatnot. I mean, at the end of the day, let's all be honest, with startups, the majority of them really don't make it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, where are they in their, fundraising situation? They were obviously further along. They were well beyond seed funding. Company had already been around, I think, for at least 5 years, when it showed up on my radar.
Might have been like 3 or 4. Yeah. Because we're like 6 almost.
6, okay. So that I got a certain level of comfort with. There were some things going into it. I think you guys kind of shared some of your heartburn with some of the way things are laid out within PadSplit. But again, nothing's going to be perfect. So you weigh the pros and cons. And like I said, the majority of my friends, acquaintances, and family that were like, I don't think so. I would just ask why. Right? Just don't dismiss it. Just, give me some reasons. Maybe I'm blinded to these reasons and think, oh my gosh, here's an aha moment. What the heck was I thinking? You're totally right. I'm going to walk away from this thing. And every time they were like, well, because of this. I was like, well, look at the flip side. Well, it's a bunch of strangers. Well, I mean, when I first moved to Orlando when I was 19, I lived in a house with a bunch of strangers.
I was going to say, student housing.
Student housing, what is student housing? Living with a bunch of strangers, right?
What's nursing homes?
Yeah.
Living with a bunch of strangers.
So, okay. So, not a very good, reason. I was able to overcome that. Well, what if someone doesn't pay you? Even better than single family, right? You have a house rented out to a family. They don't pay you.
Now you're coming out of pocket.
There's zero income coming in from the property versus if you've got 5 rooms and someone stops paying you, I still have 4 people paying the rent, right? And again, let's be brutally honest, real estate could be not the most friendly interaction sometimes, especially when someone doesn't pay the rent. But for me, anyhow, I think I'd be more at peace having to fight to move one individual out
and a whole family
versus an entire family.
Yeah.
Right? That dad lost their job and mom can't work and there's 3 kids. And it's like, my God, from a moral standpoint,
it's harder.
It's much harder.
Yeah.
So that was, an opposition. Well, what if they don't pay? Well, if they don't pay, that's fine. I've got 4 other people paying. So again, check. And no one really could back up their, I don't like it.
Or a valid reason why it would made you reconsider.
No valid reason.
And you've done your research. Like, you've done your research.
Definitely.
I know how thorough you are. So I know you came prepared when you were looking for.
And I was open-minded. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It wasn't
you were
like
not
I
there
made a
to
decision.
You were not there to challenge. You were there to just see if you haven't looked at something.
I wanted folks that, again, had an interest in me as a friend or family member to give me valid reasons to say, okay, why should I walk away from this? And there wasn't any. Nothing, at least not anything, not a good enough reason for me to be like, well, you know what, actually, you make a good point. I didn't really think of that. Because, no one person could think of it all.
Right.
Yeah.
And, so along we went. Again, getting closer and closer to now, okay, still looking as hard, if not harder, for a property that's going to fit the model and it's going to make sense for me. From a personal standpoint, I wanted something that was within like a 45-minute drive from my house because I did want to be hands-on with the very first one, not really having a general contractor team that I trusted explicitly to just say, hey, get it from point A to point B, deliver me the keys, and thank you very much, here's your check. So that was, something from a geography standpoint that I was looking at
that was a criteria for you.
It was a criteria. It was a kind of a tight box, right? If I had opened that box quite a bit more, I'm sure I would have found an opportunity sooner, but I wasn't in a rush, right? I mean, I've had a lot of clients over the years. I've been in real estate for many, many years, and I've got one that's a very good friend now. He's an older gentleman. He says there's always another bus, right? So don't get freaked out that you lost an opportunity. Don't get in a bidding war with people. There'll be other opportunities. Just be ready. Right. So that's what, my wife and I had sat down and said, okay, well, we've got this much cash, this much that we can leverage, et cetera. I had brought my father in, who was an opposition at the beginning. He's like, well, this is ridiculous. We've had properties and we read single family. I'm like, yeah, but you remember that one time you had that family that lost the job and they didn't pay for months and it was painful and emotional.
And that might be the, call it trauma, that experience. But they didn't see it at the moment like, well, you're right, but it's just one room down.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it could have been like those experiences, they were kind of moving them into the same concept.
And what you don't know, right?
Right, yeah.
There's fear
it's
of the unknown.
Yeah.
So he's like, this doesn't make any sense, But again, because I was wanting to bring him in as a partner, I had to obviously either I'd convince him and he'd be like, yeah, let's do it, or be like,
Carlos,
thanks
that
or no
is
thanks.
great.
Oh,
we
he's
love
awesome.
Him.
I met him at Mixers.
Yeah, thanks.
Like he's such a fun guy.
Yeah.
He went to the Cuban restaurant event that we had. I think
awesome.
he went to the one that's around the corner at the brewery.
Yeah. Not that one, but the one on, what was that? Bumby and Robinson.
Yeah.
He popped in that one.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
But yeah, so at the end of the day, here was opposition, kind of tooth and nail. He's like, I don't think you're doing the right thing. There's no way I'm going to give you any money, I'm
not going to be your partner.
And then fast forward, it was like, I want to say it was almost like an overnight thing. It took, weeks of.
What was the moment? Post-house rehab or the first check?
It was pre making the investment. Like,
okay.
Excuse me, I didn't have to do it on my own and then bring him in after the fact. It was before.
Okay.
That's awesome.
But it did take a while, but I want to say it was like one of those conversations. Normally I'll call my parents a few times a week when I'm out walking the dog and just, catch
Talk
up
to them.
and call him up and let's do it. I'm like, well, you ready?
You sure?
Yeah, let's do it.
What was that again? Say it again?
Yeah. So, I think, again, he went into it very closed-minded. Again, older person. I mean, the older we get,
more traditional.
More traditional.
Yeah.
I don't understand
change.
it. But then having the dialogue, he got a certain level of comfort with it and said, all right, let's do something. So, shortly thereafter, we were able to identify a house that was pretty much a total remodel. But
what was it about that house? Because funny story, and I've told you this before. We were looking at buying that same exact house.
Exactly, yeah.
And we missed it because we were trying to figure out our financing because we've already had like 5 houses. The last 2 houses that we bought were in Orlando.
Yep.
That was one of the houses we identified, but everyone has different reasons for identifying the house. So what about this house that met your criteria that you were looking for?
When you gave me the address, I was like, babe, look, this is the house that we were going to get.
That's how you know we're ethical.
That's right.
I'm like, he got it. I love it.
Great minds think alike, right?
Yeah.
So it was several things. The location, I thought, was ideal, had access to mass transit, several bus stops within that area, quick access to downtown, quick access to the highways, that run east-west, and even I-4, running northeast, southwest. So from that standpoint, I thought, okay, that's yet another check.
Yep.
The square footage, I think, was big enough that we could do some things and add some additional.
Like 1,700 or something like that.
Not before. We did add some square footage.
Okay.
Now with the square footage, it's approximately 1,700 square feet.
Okay.
But kind of the negative side is that area after Hurricane Ian, I think,
flooded.
Had flooding. There was a lake that's across the street. That was actually kind of
Well, it looks like a canal.
It's a lake. It's got a name. It's got a name.
It's got a name.
It's got a name. I forget what it is. I'll have to get back to you on that. But
it was empty during rehab.
Was it?
Like it didn't have anything.
When you were doing the renovation, it was dry. Oh wow! So it got flooded. Interesting.
Yeah. So what happened? I guess that area does have a series of canals, and the city, from what I understand, didn't shut off, certain dams or dikes or whatever to limit the amount of water going into that little lake, and it overflowed. So there was not a huge amount, but any flooding is not good. So I think it was just under 2 feet, that had actually intruded into the house. So that's the negative. The positive is that the house had already been, like, the drywall was off and whatnot. So we really had kind of a clean slate, and we're really literally able to look into the walls to make sure there was
Right.
no termite issues, no electrical issues. So that was kind of the positive, coming out of the flood situation. But yeah, I sat down, crunched the numbers. Okay, what's it going to cost to get, from this point to, the end point? And the numbers made sense for, the amount of rooms that we can get.
That's right.
I was flying kind of blind, on some estimations, again, being the first one.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys were very helpful. But I built like a whole multi-tab spreadsheet on
I was going to say that.
plugging in my cost, my closing costs,
You
my
built his
reno,
own
my,
calculator.
10% contingency, excuse me, how much I can get the rooms for, what my power bill was going to be like, et cetera. Again, the bank side of things. But what I would tell any, for unsolicited advice is...
No, solicited.
Solicited,
of course.
Think of what you want your return to be and kind of back into that.
Okay.
Don't make the investment just because. So for me, worst case scenario, setting aside money for CapEx, setting aside money for vacancy, setting aside, money for taxes and insurance at the end of the year.
Right.
I could get the return that, made sense for me. Again, that's going to be a different number for everybody else. And that was before calculating any type of appreciation, right? So it's strictly just what's my return on investment.
You're not right.
Yeah. So,
For being prepared, how did the the predicted amount that you were hoping to get versus the reality, with CapEx, with returns, with room rates? I know that when you start to invest in an area that we don't have any comps in that specific zip code, sometimes we're running off of our best guess. And in that moment in Orlando, I believe in that zip code, there weren't many, PadSplit rooms. So how did it kind of compare, and what was your, not results, but yeah, basically what are your results, and were you happy with what you ended up getting at the end of it after your first property?
I was super conservative, I think, in my calculations. So like anything, you budget this amount, you come in under budget, you're stoked.
You're winning,
right?
yeah.
Golden.
So in this particular case, that was the outcome. The outcome is that right now we are netting considerably more than what I had kind of, projected.
Accounted for. Beautiful.
Your dad's happy.
He's happy, yeah. I mean, every night that I talk to him, and he's like, has anybody moved out? Has anybody moved in? Any issues? When do I get my check?
When do I get my check?
We all ask ourselves that ironically enough, like the first, second, especially when it falls on an off week, like this week, we're like, man, this check hasn't come out yet.
Yeah.
But same conversation.
What's funny about that is, I just re-upped my lease, right, with PadSplit. So I had gone back and forth with some language on there that we kind of agreed upon. But I kept getting an email saying I hadn't signed the lease yet. So I emailed the young lady that was helping me. And she said, well, disregard is just automatically going out as a reminder. But then for this month, I'm like, I should normally get that email by now saying you're getting paid. And I hadn't gotten it. And I was about to email them. I'm like, let me give them a couple more days, just make sure. And then I got the email. So
I know. This month I was like, where is the email? Where?
Yeah, I think it was because was it June 1st was a Saturday?
Yeah, that's right.
It was either Friday or Saturday.
Yeah.
No, it was a Friday.
It was a
Was it
Sunday.
Friday?
No, Sunday. I'm
Sunday?
looking at the calendar.
Okay.
It was a Sunday.
But yeah, so I think having the banking background is extremely helpful because I can, underwrite the deal.
And you're looking at it from like the worst case scenario because you're so your brain is wired that way.
And I wouldn't say worst case scenario, because that's where I would end up not making investments in real estate.
Yeah,
right?
You're right. You had to make a pivot in your mindset. I
exactly.
feel like.
So worst case scenario is a deal killer. I mean, every deal is a bad deal if you what if it enough, right? I mean, that's just the reality of it.
You're right. If this, if that, if
forget it. They're all crap deals if you do that to them. So you've got to kind of take a step back and say, all right, is that a realistic what if? No, I don't think I'm going to be vacant with no rooms rented for, 3 months. I don't think I'm going to get to that point. And I built it with, again, enough conservative estimates where
even then the numbers made sense.
Yeah. I went into it, again, kind of blind in some aspects where I had no idea what the utility bill would be like, right? So I just said, okay, I can't imagine it's going to be any more than $75 per person, right? And it's been considerably less than that. We had a couple surprises. We had a leak in the roof after the fact. That was a couple grand. And then just recently, actually, our air conditioner compressor went out. But we had already kind of gone in thinking that we were on borrowed time.
Okay.
Because it was an older unit.
Okay.
And again, one of the things that I budget for is that CapEx, right? So I set that money aside, and that was one thing I would tell anyone that is going to take on a partner, even if it's even more importantly, if it's family or friend, make it clear that just because after we paid our expenses, we got $1,000 left, we're not splitting that 50-50 because, $250 of that's staying in the bank account because crap's going to break. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And it's a lot easier to come the end of the year say, hey, we've got more than enough money here, so here's a kind of annual bonus versus, hey, Ray, Orianna, the AC broke and we got zero in the bank account. Can you guys send me a check for $500 each?
Now come out of pocket.
It's a lot harder to ask than it is to just say, hey, surprise, Merry Christmas, here's a little check at the end of the year. So have those conversations, on the front end. Again, I think even more importantly with friends and family or partners that maybe are not experienced in real estate, because a lot easier conversation to have on the front end than getting that phone call and saying, can you send me a check?
So many good nuggets, Carlos.
How much is your CapEx? Is it a percentage?
So I've got, what do I have baked in there? I've got 10% vacancy that I just automatically, keep in the bank account. And
as your house, is it like at a 90 or 100%?
We were at 100% there for a little while. We just had someone move out because they wanted to relocate. So if you're looking for a room,
here's my referral code.
That's right. Here's my QR code. But the CapEx, I think I've got 7.5. I think PadSplit, I think when they're valuing some of their properties that are being resold, I think they've got it at a 5, but I've got mine at 7.5.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What's been the hardest thing about being such a hands-on host? Because you're very hands-on, and I love that.
And you don't have property management.
I am property management.
Correct.
You are.
Yeah.
What's been the hardest part or the rewarding part? Like, not just the negative, but the pros.
I mean, for me, just my personality, I grew up, never going without. But my dad was always someone that if something broke, he was going to at least attempt to fix it, right? So I always grew up with that, and I kind of feel the same way. I think I've got a little better understanding as to where I'm, out of my element and say I'm not even going down that route. I'm going to hire somebody. But I think I know enough, thanks to my dad, to be able to take on certain tasks.
And delegate others.
And delegate and hire, but then even still have enough, I think, base knowledge that when the AC guy shows up and he's like, oh, your flux capacitor is busted, I'd be like, you're full of shit. No flux capacitor. So have an understanding, because again, let's be honest, it's tough to find, I think, good tradespeople out there that are honest, reasonable, and they're, those are worth their weight in gold.
I agree.
But it's hard to find them.
Yeah.
So, so it could be challenging at times. Again, married, kids. How do you find the time? And so that could be a bit of a hurdle sometimes. Some things I might have, the skill set to handle, but I will engage someone to do it just because of time.
Would you have changed that? Would you have used property management looking back at it, or would you advise? And obviously, this isn't professional advice or anything, but would you advise people to try it out at first, or use
100%? I would tell people 100% to definitely research and interview property managers, because again, like anything, like we just said a second ago, there's people that are really good at what they do, and they'll do it 1,000 times better than you can ever do it. And that's not to say that I'm not at some point in time going to consider a property manager. I think we just wanted to self-manage because it's one, and because I have the skill set and the time being self-employed to handle that. If folks are getting into it and mom and dad both are W-2 and Monday through Friday 9 to 5 kind of thing, property manager would be ideal, especially if they have limited or no real estate investing experience, right? So I think it's definitely something that most people, right, should kind of budget for that from the beginning. If they're not, unfortunately, able to identify a good property manager, if they want to try it, but definitely do not dismiss, having a property manager, because it's, again, if you have a good property manager, it would be ideal.
I agree.
So what stage are you in now? You have your first property. It's been over a year at this point, and
like
you
summer.
Almost a year to the date, actually.
Yeah, summer. I remember it was like around summertime.
Yeah, I think it was like late June that we went live. It's honestly, it's proof of concept, right? It's firsthand proof of concept. It works. Obviously the PadSplit platform is extremely helpful in, self-managing, right? Just because, again, you have that communication, the messenger app between members and yourself as a host. So that helps a lot. The checklist when someone moves out, someone's coming in, to make sure, hey, you update the door codes, make sure you clean, sanitize, etc. Has been extremely helpful. But, like anything, nothing's perfect. I mean, absolutely nothing's perfect. There's a few things that I would love to see change. I think I've voiced it to you guys. I've voiced it to whoever I get on the phone, when I call about something. And like anything, like any smart corporation, you got to kind of prioritize. And hey, no one's really complaining but you, Carlos, about this issue, so that's not going to get looked at. Right. But when we've got,
it's in the list. It's not on the top. Not at the top.
It's on the very back somewhere on a napkin. But I think you guys have had an opportunity, I think, get to know me pretty well, and I'm kind of outspoken. I've got an opinion just about everything, but I am open-minded, obviously, when I have an opinion and someone objects and gives me some feedback, and I'm more than happy to adjust my opinion if I've got some new information, right? But I can't not recommend the concept to anyone. I think, again, there's a desperate need for housing that's affordable. I think this is a spoke in the wheel, all right, of how we address this national crisis, really. And I think this is the co-living concept. I think is a great way of beginning to address that. I think it's not just beginning. I think in the long term, this will be more widely accepted. I think, to your point, centuries ago, a rooming house was not an uncommon thing anywhere, right? We just, as a country, we've made a huge, multi-decade effort to. The American dream is homeownership, family. Right? It's family, it's homeownership. But we have, sadly, I think we've neglected the fact that we've all been single at a point in our lives, and this product could have been a perfect fit.
I probably
for
have
a lot
shared
of
this
us.
with you. In our biggest age demographic, 25 to 35, 50 to 65. Those are those big stages in life when you're going through a transition.
Yeah.
Getting into the workforce, getting, entry-level pay job. That doesn't allow you to buy
Right.
that home. Or divorce, empty nesters. Maybe you are also a veteran and you're re-engaging into the workforce again.
Right.
So those are the people that are benefiting significantly from living in a PadSplit.
I agree.
And they're
really,
single income
Yeah.
earners.
So that's the thing. I mean, when we make decisions, and sometimes it's not easy, you have to kind of divorce yourself from living just in your shoes and seeing the world through your eyes, right? So who are these people? Well, these are people that, again, to your point, are in the workforce, blue collar, maybe just getting into the workforce, maybe towards the end of their working career. Now they're a widower, or divorced and, grown kids.
Mm.
They still live in Orlando. The kids are away. And it's tough, right? And when your cost of housing is a huge percentage of your net income, how can you do anything else, right? So this is a great product to help folks like that. Again, you give up some privacy, you give up some things, but it may not work for you, but it works for a lot of people. And that's what I found. I was kind of the friends and family that objected to it and say, like, oh, I would never live in a place like that. You're going to be a slumlord. It's like, no, we're providing a quality, safe, updated, clean house, right, for individuals to live in. And it's not anything like that. I mean, I've got a gentleman that works at Disney. I've got a woman that's a masseuse. I've got a guy that's in construction. I mean, it varies. I got a guy that works at, he's a technician at a car dealership. So everyone's working and or going to school. And this, to your point earlier, this is helping them, if they want to, save money to buy that home, or save money to travel, or save money because they want to retire early, or whatever. It's a great savings vehicle, is quite honestly what's kind of the almost the secondary effect of living in a co-living space, is the ability to save and then use that for something else. Shoot, there might be people that on paper, they're like, why would you rent a room here when you got this much money in the bank? It's like, because I like having this much money in the bank. I want to put my little, dollar cost averaging $500 a month into the S&P 500 EFT and be able to retire by the time I'm 60 versus 72. Mm-hmm. And this affords them that ability to do that. Because again, to your point, if you lived in a studio apartment with all the privacy, and even that's, I think, overblown, because when you live in an apartment, yeah, there's no one else in your room, but you got a neighbor there,
Yep.
there. I mean, all around you potentially.
And we just discussed what it costs to rent, but you haven't factored in utilities.
Yeah, exactly.
Deposits.
Yeah, that's just your gross,
Furniture
right?
costs.
Yeah. So
Furnishing a place.
yeah, is not cheap, right?
Oh, we know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I've shared this with you. Obviously, Ray knows, but I've lived in a room before. And you made reference to sharing this with your close circle, and they were like, I would never. It's not their current reality.
Exactly, but it was at one point.
Correct. But
Yeah.
maybe 10 years before they were married and with a family, that would have been a great opportunity for them.
Sure. And I think what's happened that has made that different is, again, I don't know the hard statistics, but especially in Florida, and even more specifically here in Orlando, housing expense as a percentage of gross pay, not even net pay,
Mm-hmm.
is extremely high,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I don't think it was probably as a percentage of income as high 20 years ago, or even 30 years ago. But now, as pay has stayed pretty steady and cost of housing has gone up, it's really put, a lot of pressure on trying to squeeze out as much cash. And here's the thing. This is gross pay. You don't pay your bills with gross pay. You pay it with net pay.
Mm-hmm.
And You don't get to write off your housing expense to be tax-free. That has to come out of your net pay. So it puts a lot of pressure on a lot of folks that really need the help. And I mean, they could be a paycheck away from living in a car.
That's right.
So this really helps them, save month in and month out and have that cushion. So
what were we gonna go with?
No, this is a big reason why this is such a concept that's so close to my heart. My ethical, my moral, my compass as a human, because I know the reality of those people.
Yeah.
Not that I always was in that space, but I did needed that help, and not just because I was that person, but I'm familiar with those people.
Sure.
So it just, as an investor, is beautiful because we're truly achieving high returns, and we're also able to change our lives through these investments.
Right.
In a different kind of level, right? But it resonates so heavy with me because I know how much is helping so many people.
It's, if you really sit down and dissect it, I was having a conversation with someone just the other day about mental health. And think about where your mental health would be if you had to live out of your car.
Yeah.
Right? Versus having, again, this living situation where you're able to afford a private room in a really nice house, hopefully with, good roommates, essentially, and not have to worry about that situation. I mean, your situation would change immensely if you had to go to work every day and you had to go into the Wawa bathroom in the morning to kind of freshen up before you go to work, versus having a private room with a clean shower, clean kitchen, and we all benefit. As a society, I think we all benefit from having a product like this out there to help those folks that, don't have a substance abuse problem, don't have a mental health issue where they're homeless because of all these other, things going on in their life, but they are a paycheck away potentially from being homeless. So that's the other thing. I think the amount of benefit to providing this product in the community is just, the list is,
pretty extensive.
Extensive, yeah. So it's, it's an honor to be able to provide a product like this out there. And again, to your point, you have attractive returns. That only helps yourself and your family, and potentially motivates you to do the next one and the one after that and the one after that, to continue to provide a product that's desperately needed and be rewarded, financially for that, for you and your family. And I think Orlando in particular, obviously we're a bit biased, but is
the best. Don't come here if you don't live here.
Exactly.
Stay away. I'm kidding.
We have a lot of traffic. Everyone is very mean and nasty.
Very hot, very humid.
Don't come to Florida, and if you do, stay away from Orlando.
Mickey Mouse is not that friendly anyways.
But it's
quite aggressive.
I'm kidding.
He's not a mouse, he's a rat, actually.
That's right.
Came from New York.
Yeah.
Grimy mouse. A rat.
I mean, we do have a lot of jobs coming into the market.
Oh gosh, the amount of growth that Orlando's having is it's
I grew
awesome.
up in Miami, and I've been here now, what's about 26 years.
I didn't know you grew up in Miami, but
I did.
Okay.
I did. Hialeah in particular.
Okay. We have some passes in Hialeah.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. It's, that housing that's affordable is desperately needed in Miami.
Oh,
because
wow.
it's so expensive down there.
Oh, gosh. That's another universe.
But Orlando now, in my opinion, is, from an economic and population standpoint, I've never really sat down to look at the numbers, but it's probably like what Miami was when I left in 98. I mean, from a population standpoint, a traffic standpoint, even an economic standpoint of, what's going on, is, I would say, very similar to what Miami was 25 years ago. Not that we'll ever be Miami, just because
we don't have a beach.
We don't have a beach.
Yeah, we're not
exactly.
We're not a port.
Yeah.
We don't
have
a port.
Yeah. We don't have a beach, so we will never be that way. But it's a great economy to be in. And
It
like
really
you said,
is.
we really have just a huge influx of population.
Yep.
And because we are still very much a service industry, all the more reason that we need a product like this.
Like this.
Quite honestly, I think the future, I don't think it's the immediate future, but I think the future is essentially building co-living structures, right? I mean, we have them already.
Yeah, downtown Orlando has one.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I
They're
didn't realize that.
So there is an incentive from the government that when you're doing a commercial building to designate 1/3 of the project into co-living, and you're going to get some tax
Is that
incentives
at the
as
city
a builder.
level or?
City.
That's
So there's a
interesting.
lot of these now commercial projects that are having a percentage of their construction becoming co-living properties.
And it's funny
Yeah.
because before PadSplit, I think I was still in my wholesaling life. We were seeing apartment complexes near USF where instead of it being like a 3-2, it's 3 individual rooms,
Right.
and it was room rentals. And then I started to see it news reports within the last year now in Orlando where Disney's apparently building for their college program something similar where it's room rentals for people in their college program.
Yep.
And then downtown Orlando, one of their new developments, and I think it's open now, also room rentals. And so you start to see a lot of these room rentals in the commercial space, but it's still a lack of housing because when we start to talk about Disney employees, when we start to talk about Polk County and the amounts of people that are staying in motels with their families, and they're crammed into motels that are supposed to be for one person, I've definitely been invited to speak in front of like city councils out in Polk County and in Orlando where they can't solve it locally. And it's a problem that would probably have a private solution to it. And that's kind of where I've noticed PadSplit being such obviously a great asset in this realm.
Yeah. And I think when we have major problems like that, in my opinion, government won't solve it. I mean, that's just the reality of it. At minimum, it has to be kind of a government-private
Right.
Concept. Bless you.
Bless you.
Thank you.
If not just private, right? And the municipality has got to do something to help that private investor, developer, succeed and be able to then provide this
Right.
product. Because again, the government does, in my opinion, does not have a very good track record of just doing things from.
It's too costly, and that there's
It's
not
too costly, and they just don't do it well. I think
Right.
when you think you could just kind of do something willy-nilly and do a half penny tax on this for a finite amount of time, well, what happens when that runs out? What happens when the next politician gets into office and kills it, and now that fund has shriveled up, and now that maybe thriving property now becomes the
project
of the project,
Yep.
right? So I think the only way that it really is successful is when there's a good marriage between government, incentivizing a private developer to be able to develop something, give their investors the return that is competitive, in the space, and then obviously for municipality, they can tout the fact that, hey, we voted for this, we made it happen. Now look at all these, single people that are living in this place. That here's a story about Ray living in his car and Carlos living, from week to week, from friend's couch to couch. And these are all people working
Right.
that are, now have housing. So I think it really is, again, it's not going to be the magic bullet, that solves the crisis, but it definitely is, I think, a spoke in the wheel of how we address it. But I would like to see, obviously, a bit more of a buy-in from the local municipalities. And again, the NIMBYs come out in force, but they have to be able to draw a line and say, listen, we need this. Would you rather this, or would you rather have hundreds, if not thousands, of people living on the
in the streets?
Right?
What do you prefer to see?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I don't live downtown. I don't got to see that. Well, you don't have to go very far to see it.
Oh yeah, it's already happening in states like Washington.
Yeah.
But
it could potentially be like that in Florida.
it could be.
we've got the population.
I see it growing. Like Tampa to me is a city that has a lot of homelessness already.
Really?
Orlando, we see it. It's a little bit more hidden, but honestly, in the past 2 to 3 years, it's a lot more predominant.
Yeah, I don't know about hidden. I mean,
Yeah,
I was going to say
one greets you every morning.
Yeah, exactly. Multiple.
Yeah.
I mean, on any.
But it's more common than maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Not that it wasn't, but you're seeing it more recurrent.
And what I think you're seeing is beyond just the person at the major intersection. Now you're seeing them at not so major intersections, and now you're seeing
Tents.
Right. So
Several tents.
where before it was just someone with a cup at a major intersection. Now all of a sudden you're seeing their home, right? So I think that puts it more in your face, and I think as a resident, it should be more on our radar that hey, we do have to do something. We have to suck it up, and at the end of the day, the municipalities have to incentivize developers to provide product out there to help get some of these people, that are willing. I mean, I'm sure there's, sadly, a percentage of those folks that's almost a lifestyle, right? But there's a ton of people that are working and that are homeless.
I agree.
And that's a tragedy when people are willing
And
mentally and physically able
contributing to the society.
Exactly. Provide, be part of a progressive society, and they can't have, secure, safe housing. That's a tragedy.
I agree.
Yeah.
So are your friends also now a year later like, oh, Carlos, I guess it was a good idea after all?
Are you raising capital on those friends?
We know your dad.
Yeah.
Your dad is, all for it. But what about the other individuals near you that were?
It's like anything. We all have certain friends that are, hang out, have a good time, have a beer, have a good laugh. And then we have friends that are business people that are thinking, hey, how can I find a need, fill it, be successful, and help somebody out. So some of those friends haven't really come around, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that's, their opinion. They're not in real estate, and this was my opinion, and now I've got proof of concept, so it's no longer an opinion. It's like, here's my income statement.
Right.
I mean, it works. It makes money.
That's your benchmark.
That's it. But now that speaks volumes, right?
Right.
Whereas before I'm thinking of, these are my guesstimations, these are my estimates. Now it's like tried and true. I've got a year's worth of, NOI, and it's like, wow, that's not bad. And it's an asset that I can, again, kind of three-prong, right? It's creating cash flow. It's helping me on my, tax burden, right? Because I've got a depreciable asset. And
you're building equity.
And I'm building equity. We're in Florida. If you, in my opinion, and I've been saying this for years, so shame on me for not getting into real estate sooner, but you cannot go wrong with Florida real estate unless you're buying something right on the water that might be underwater in a decade. But
literally underwater.
Yeah, literally. Not just financially, but literally underwater.
Correct.
If you're looking at real estate short term, I think that's a gamble. But if you're looking at real estate long term, you cannot go wrong in Florida.
I'm with you.
I honestly, I've got a good friend of mine who was a former bank customer, and really like a second father and a mentor to me. He's owned real estate for decades, and he bought, in areas where his friends and family were like, "What are you thinking? You're throwing your money away." And some of that stuff now is worth, the big CRE firms are knocking on his door, be like, "Hey, I've got buyers. Let me list it for you. We could get you this," just ridiculous cap rates on things that, you couldn't give away 20 years ago. But again, Florida, right? You buy and you hold it long enough. And that's the key, I think, is obviously you have to have, you got to have the Constitution to write out the things that will come, because there's going to be negative things that happen. There's going to be challenges. But then also, do you have the financial backing to carry on, right? If you invest everything you got into real estate and you got nothing else left in the tank, not a good idea, right? Because at the end of the day, between now and the end of your life in real estate, there's going to be ups and downs. So you've got to have the capital to, to carry you, right? The carrying cost. And that's what I've seen some amateur real estate investors, they'll get into it and you get to talking to them. They're like, oh yeah, I only got to put in a couple $100 every month. And I'm thinking, you're what?
Putting in.
You're putting in?
Uh-huh.
Where?
It's like, but the going's good. If you have to put money in to something month in and month out, when things are good, you're going to be in trouble when they get soft, because they will soften up. I mean, that's just the reality
Cycles.
of it. It's all cyclical, right? But in the long term, man, it's a 99% guarantee that you'll be fine. But if you're trying to time it, don't time the market. If you're trying to buy something low and sell it high,
that's gambling.
It's gambling. Exactly. Might as well jump on a plane and go to Vegas, right?
Yep.
But if I think if you're conservative enough, if you leave some in the bank, for that rainy day, you're going to be fine, and you're going to be more than fine.
What's next for Carlos Morell and his real estate journey?
Yeah. So
what are you studying, or what are you practicing, or what are you looking into or doing?
Still looking at, potential properties, obviously off market, wholesale is really the only ones that make sense. I want to say I'm seeing more volume. I want to say that either more people are getting maybe a little shaky and putting their houses up for sale with a wholesaler because they're thinking, okay, maybe it's not going to get any better than this. But the prices are still pretty high, right? So I'd love to do a deal right now, but I'm not in a rush to do it. I'm not going to do a deal just for the sake of doing a deal. I still want to look at it and say, okay, well, it's got X amount of rooms, this or square footage. One of the things that I did on the first one that I wouldn't necessarily do again is add more square footage. I'd like to stay away from that, especially a second bathroom. So now I'm only looking at properties that have at least 2 bathrooms.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe 1.5 or 2.5.
Or maybe, the half bath, if it could easily be converted to a full. Yeah.
We've done that. We've had halves and made it into a full, but plumbing was there.
Right.
So
right.
it was so much of an easier
yeah.
conversion.
But yeah, to answer your question, Ray, I'm still looking. I mean, I'm still 100% sold on co-living. I'm not looking at anything that's like a 2-1, 850 square foot, because there's plenty of investors out there that are doing the single family thing. Let them do their thing. They could fill that need for families. And I want to stay focused on, the co-living concept, renting out rooms to people that, need that product. I think fills a need. So really that's it. Again, still looking in Metro Orlando, really not pushing outward. It was the first property obviously took quite a bit of time, took time away from my family. So that was a little bit of a challenge. But now that, things have leveled off and the money's coming in, that seems to change the opinion.
And it was rewarding.
It's rewarding, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's, the dopamine, right? It's finally, it's now I'm getting that high. It worked, money's coming in, and, we're keeping the lights on and we're being successful. So that's exciting. So we want to replicate that. But again, in no rush, right? So I'm not looking to get into any bidding wars. At some point, I think, we touched on development. You mentioned the one downtown. I would like to maybe try a ground up, to be honest with you. That's something that I've kind of toyed around with a little bit, especially if, if I'm able to partner with one of the local municipalities, be it the city or the county, on, identifying an area. Maybe they've got some land that that we can explore, putting up a co-living structure on, I think would be a cool thing to explore.
Love that.
Love that for you. So anyone watching that's selling properties, Carlos is looking for a property in
Always.
Orlando within 40 minutes from city center, I believe.
Yep.
Something with square footage so he doesn't have to add square footage. So
That would be ideal. Especially the bathroom thing for sure.
Oh,
So,
yeah. That's another.
I lead with
negotiable.
bathroom. I don't lead with bedroom.
Yeah,
The
I
bathroom
agree.
thing, like, it limits you completely.
Yeah.
And it costs so much money
It's
to
so
add it.
costly.
So it's
so
like,
It's pretty inexpensive to add drywall and a
Right.
door.
Right.
It's not that inexpensive to add
An
piping
entire
and everything else
Like,
that comes with a
Yep.
shower.
demo, everything.
Yeah.
Carlos, are you open to also share a little bit more with other people and how can they reach you if they want to pick your brain?
Sure. So my day job. So I've got a firm that does business consulting, and then I also do commercial loan brokering. So we'll do some hard money stuff on the residential side, on the investment side. But mostly I'm looking at equipment financing, retail strip financing, things like that. And then on the consulting side, folks that have been in business for a while
Mhm.
and are maybe kind of stuck in neutral, they have potential there to grow, but more often than not, I would say actually 100% of the time, what gets you from day one to maybe year 3 or 4 isn't necessarily what's going to get you from year 4
To
to
your
year
7.
10. And folks think that they could just replicate what they did for the first few years and still have the same success, and that's not the case. So that's kind of where my niche on the consulting side lies. But from a real estate investment side, that's my moonlighting job. I'm more than open to share, my experiences, however I can help anyone else that's maybe on the fence or maybe someone that is doing it. And again, is that person that's saying, I'm stoked. I'm only putting in a couple $100 a month. It's like, there's probably something we could do to make it where you're making at least a couple $100 a
Right.
month. Again, I wouldn't say super conservative, but I'm conservative in my estimates where I want to be able to absorb if I've got to bring down my rents.
Right.
If I have unforeseen expenses that come up in the future. So I think that's the right way to underwrite without just, again, to your point, Ray, gambling and
Yep.
hoping that, I put in empty out my IRA and put it all into one property
Yeah.
and I've got no wiggle room. That's tragic.
I get sick when I hear that.
Yeah.
When,
And again, not to sound brutal, but when folks make decisions like that maybe did come for me for advice and didn't heed my advice or didn't come to me for advice, like, what's the address? Because again, that at some point in time there will be a misstep there. And if they need an exit strategy, you might be able to help them.
Right.
Yeah.
With that exit strategy, you might be able to benefit right from a lower cost
Right.
property. Again, not to sound brutal, but it's just the reality. I mean,
Yeah, certainly.
any good stock market investor would tell you, you buy when there's blood in the streets. I mean, that's just
That's how it is.
the reality of it.
Yeah.
But again, not everyone's going to listen to your advice.
Yeah.
Not everyone's going to not look at it as a educated guess and go into it like Las Vegas and just say, I'm all in, and not, looking at their cards before going all in. So I think that's unwise, obviously. But someone makes an unwise decision, there might be someone like yourselves or myself that are able to come in, help them, and at the same time benefit from a good deal, right?
How can we reach you? LinkedIn?
LinkedIn, my cell phone. I could leave you a business card. Maybe you could
Okay.
put it at the end of
Okay.
the show. I've got a website. I don't do a great job of updating that just because I've been staying so darn busy without really having to market that. But LinkedIn is a great place to start. And then obviously my cell phone number is my direct business line as well.
So Carlos Morell on LinkedIn?
Yep. Carlos Morell on LinkedIn. Email is carlos@camorellconsulting.com. So my initials CA Morell, MORELL, consulting.com.
Perfect. We'll attach that to the show notes.
Cool.
But
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, we absolutely appreciate you being here.
I appreciate the invitation. I'm honored to be on the show. Hopefully, there's some positive tidbits that we can all benefit from.
You had a lot of golden nuggets for sure.
Yeah, thanks.
We all need mentors. We all need someone that we can learn from. And I'm sure we have probably common mentors or people we bounce ideas off of. So
100%.
Even ones that aren't common. So with that being said, I hope that obviously people can learn from your experience and can take that to find success for themselves and their families. So
I totally agree with that. At the end of the day, there's no one person that's lived it all, right? So if we're able to kind of extrapolate some experiences and some have some foresight by listening to others, I think that's ideal. I think when we shut down and are closed-minded about listening to other people's opinion or roll our eyes, that's where you lose, some benefit.
Missed opportunity.
Sure.
Thank you for being here, Carlos.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right.
thanks for tuning into the Coliving with PadSplit podcast hosted by Ray and Orianna Nunez. For more exclusive content and community updates, join our Facebook group and follow us on all social media platforms. Stay tuned for more episodes.